Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. As we enter November, deeper into fall, and the trees shed their leaves, we're graced with fall pwn to own, and softwares share their vulnerabilities. Which means this week, we talk with Grant McCracken, the founder of DarkHorse Security, about bug bounties, vulnerability disclosure, and pen testing. Stick around as we fuzz our way into Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest Appsec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
Created in 2005 and hosted by security industry veterans, Paul's Security Weekly is your source for in-depth coverage of the latest vulnerabilities, exploits, and security research. Our weekly security news discussion dives deep into the security issues we face today and potential solutions in a fun and lively atmosphere. Each week, we bring on guests from the security community to learn about their journey and discuss topics relevant to their work and research. You can also subscribe to our show by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Paul's Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher. We've recorded a ton of content over the years, so we created Spotify playlists featuring some of our favorite episodes, including interviews with Marcus Random, John McAfee, and Chris Roberts, to name a few. You can find them at securityweekly.com/starter packs.
This is episode 306, recorded on Thursday. Let's try Monday, November 4th, 2024. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is Mr. John Kinsella. How are you doing, John?
Adrian, the day sort of blends together, but Mondays have a sort of a special something to them, but it's good to see you.
You can tell I copy my script over from my podcast, which records on Thursdays. That's where that Thursday came from. So yes, as everyone can see and hear, if you're just listening to this podcast, I am not Mike. I am standing in for Mike for the next 3 weeks, including this one. So babysitting the show while he's gone and going to do my best to take good care of it. All right, so today we have Grant McCracken with us, as I mentioned. He recently founded DarkHorse Security. Grant spent nearly a decade in different roles at BugCrowd, most recently as the VP of Operations. He built BugCrowd's Pentest as a Service product line and oversaw service delivery across all product lines. Welcome to the show, Grant.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so jumping into it, with that intro, 10 years at BugCrowd, what inspired you to start this up, to leave BugCrowd and do your own thing? Was it just time? And maybe tell us a little bit about why you particularly chose. I mean, clearly this market, right? So that makes sense. But why now? Why DarkHorse Security?
Yeah. After being there for about 10 years, I felt like it was kind of time to take a break. So I just left. And when I was sitting trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do next? Right. Cause you can't just sit around and do nothing. For a very limited amount of time.
It gets old.
Yeah, it gets old very quickly. And so, I want to do something loosely philanthropic. The bad joke I always tell is, if I, tried to go save the polar bears or the whales or whatever needs saving, right? I would just get in the way, right? There's that, joke where
that's not your skill set.
Yeah. If it would, something that would take half the amount of time would take twice as long with me involved. So what is my skill set? It's application security and it's crowdsourced security. And so, just thinking about it, what if I tried to make that more available to the rest of the world? Right. And so that was kind of the idea behind creating DarkHorse Security. And so it's a platform that makes, vulnerability disclosure, bug bounty programs, and pen testing as a service, accessible and affordable to organizations of all sizes and budgets.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. On my podcast, Enterprise Security Weekly, we talk a lot about the market, and particularly one of the things about the VC-funded cybersecurity vendor space is that there's often not really room for SMBs, SMEs, charities, nonprofits, stuff like that. Like you've financially, for it to make sense, you can't hire enough salespeople to go after those markets. They will destroy your profit margins. So you instead go after the Fortune 100, the Fortune 500, the Global 2000, companies where you can have, very high, average contract value, ACV. And, so that leaves a lot of opportunity in these smaller markets. So I wonder if while you were at BugCrowd, was this something pretty common you saw where companies looking for this sort of thing that needed this sort of thing, but, just didn't have the budget?
I never, one of the areas where I didn't spend much time is on the pre-sale side of the house, right? So I spent all my time on the post-sale, and occasionally they'd bring me in, once deals were, mature enough to kind of need my input. But, I really don't know. Right. That's not something that ever came up. Right. I was never in a conversation where organizations were like, oh, this is too expensive. And it's honestly not something I ever thought about while I was there. But, again, when you step back and you look at it, if you look at like the total number of organizations that are using one of these existing platforms, right? BugCrowd, HackerOne, Integrity, Yes We Hack, Cobalt, Synac, the total market penetration is maybe 3,000-4,000 companies total, right? I mean, that's just such a small fraction of just how much is out there, right? I mean, I was looking at the data and like there's over 70,000 organizations in the US alone that are over $5 million in revenue, right? And that's just the US, right? If we look at like the global market, there's a lot more. So, but yeah, to answer your question, not really something that ever came up while I was at BugCrowd, no.
So we've got three services in the title of this segment. We've got bug bounties, we've got vulnerability disclosure, and we've got pen tests. And one of those things I think is probably the most approachable, from an entry level for a company. And, I remember this is years and years ago. Well, maybe not that many. It seems like it with the pandemic, but maybe 2019, I wrote up a post called "Everyone Needs a Vulnerability Disclosure Policy." Because you need some way to contact somebody to let them know if you find something that's gone awry. If you found a bug, if you found all of a company's customers or patient records, on an open S3 bucket somewhere, you need some way to get a hold of someone. And I'm sure all three of us and some of the audience have seen what happens when that doesn't happen. We've seen cases where it takes 6 months, a year, and somebody just gets fed up and goes full disclosure because they can't find anybody to take care of an issue. So is that, how do you envision bringing VDPs to everybody?
One, by making them, and this kind of broadly applies to everything that I'm trying to do here. One, making it affordable, right? And in the context of VDPs, that's free. Now, HackerOne and BugCrowd both offer free VDP services at this point in time as well. But making vulnerability disclosure programs free and then making it extremely easy to do, right? So again, if you're a 5-10 person startup, you maybe don't have somebody allocated to security. You're not really thinking about how do I do this? What's the process? And so another thing that I've focused on in terms of building DarkHorse is focusing on making it accessible to everybody in the sense that you can not know a ton about security and still be able to set up a vulnerability disclosure program or a bug bounty or even a pen test, right?
Talk to us more about this, because this is really, in a previous life, I had a startup. I was trying to do a startup that was not doing what you're doing, but it was aiming towards that same SMB market crowd from a security point of view. So there's two aspects that for me was really interesting. I think we've talked about on the show before, which is there's a lot of education you have to do. And then the second aspect is it almost feels like you need to be an MSSP, managed security services provider, more so than the bug bounty or the other aspects of it. So how do you, it's sort of the help me help you thing. How do you deal with that with these guys that have no idea?
Yeah. I'm learning. Right. So I'm open to any suggestions. Right. That's something I'm trying to figure out. So I was at Disrupt, last week. Just out there talking to founders and early stage startups to understand, okay, are you even thinking about security? And a lot of them aren't, right? So a lot of that, to your point, exactly, is just an education, issue. I'm not, you've got a point about the MSSP side of things, right? Because I mean, it's much easier when everything is just kind of all one package, right? It's just a one-stop shop. And I think there's potentially some opportunity for, again, if this catches on and this works, right? There's an opportunity by servicing that end of the market to be an educator as well, right? So if and where there's, and again, we're talking, I don't know, 2050 or something like that, like really far out, but if this works in terms of providing these accessible and affordable services to organizations, within that more cost constrained market, right? It would be then a very useful position to then continue to educate them. Okay, so now you've done a pen test. Here's other things you should be doing. You've set up your vulnerability disclosure. Here's other things you could be doing. But again, that's sort of super grand vision. But yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
I promise I'm not trying to shoot down you. This is super important. I think I'm not trying to kill your idea. It'd be interesting to see. I think we've seen over the last, the old line I used to tell was, when I was doing security training back in the 2010s, for developers, you'd first question ask in a classroom, who here knows what, SQL injection is, or that type of thing. And over the years, the number of hands being raised went up and up and up. So I think the interest and the awareness of security is getting there. I mean, you're able to talk about it at Disrupt and people have some sense of, what you mean. I'm curious to see, there's always been that balance then too of startup needs to build startup stuff. Startup doesn't really care about security until it's too late. So how do you get them to think about it earlier?
Yeah. And that's something that, I'm figuring out and trying to work on. But, again, don't have to use the term that it got thrown around probably too much, but boil the ocean, right? There may be 70,000 companies. I don't have to, help all 70,000, right? If I can help 50 of those, right?
Yeah.
That's accomplishing the goal, right? And so, I think probably, at least kind of where I'm at is talking to organizations that are aware of security and then going, so there's organizations that are aware of it, but can't afford it. Right. So that's the first segment. Right. And so that's, they have the education, they have the awareness, they just don't have the budget. Right. So it's much easier to service that cohort first, and then we can move on to educating more broadly. But again, it's all of it and just trying to figure things out one day at a time.
Yeah, if I'm to put on my startup advisor hat, I see that being, kind of your IDP, right? Your ideal customer profile. Whereas you are in a position where you could probably get a lot of referrals, where, somebody says, I don't have that kind of budget. They're looking for a service, and somebody refers them to you and says, well, this guy's specifically set up, for companies with not a lot of budget that need some help with this. And, my general impression that most people come across, or a lot of organizations come across bug bounty, when they're dealing with their first bug submission, right? They're unsolicited bug submissions, let's call them. Somebody found cross-site scripting and they want $2,000, right? What do I do with this, influx of information? How do I handle this in a way that, doesn't have a bad outcome? And then pen tests, I would think, are somewhat the same, where one day a company will get told by somebody, maybe it's a customer they're trying to close, they're trying to land, or some kind of regulation, some auditor, they will be told to go out and get a pen test, and that will also be, I think, an opportunity for referrals for you. But is that kind of the way you're envisioning it? I always saw, it was clear to me that the, kind of VDP was the first step into bug bounty before you create a program or actually invite anybody in. At least figure out what that process looks like, and have some kind of path for somebody to submit something to you. But then, I think naturally that's not how people come to you, right? It's initiated by someone telling them they need a pen test or someone telling them they need to pay them for a bug that they found.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Again, in the people I was talking to last week, I don't think people got it when I was explaining what a VDP is to them. And I completely agree that like VDP is just table stakes, right? It should just be like, it's so easy and there's no reason not to do it. But the people did understand or had some sense of awareness around pen testing, right? So oddly enough, pen testing tends to be kind of like the starter conversation, in terms of, oh yeah, I need some degree of security assessment. And there, even if there was, and again, this is loose just in terms of the people I've talked to, but, there's an acceptance and understanding that they need to do that testing, whether or not somebody's asking them to. So again, I think that people are, thinking about security and they're aware of it. They're just not necessarily aware of how or where to do it. And they think it's probably expensive. And again, the goal is to try to alleviate all of those things, right? It's easy, it's accessible, and it's affordable.
Right. And just curious, out of TechCrunch Disrupt, did you get a sense for, in the startup world, it's interesting, and I kind of wonder this with Secure by Design as well. Like it's kind of growth at all costs, so I really wonder what the appetite would be like there. Like certainly if you're building products for certain industries, I think you're like, yeah, we got to get security kind of right. There's some regulation here or something like that versus other ones where they're like, yeah, if something happens, we'll deal with it. But, we're just going to ignore security as long as we can. Like HR and so many other things that businesses, if we're still alive, then we'll start thinking about that. Right. So kind of curious the vibe you got from there. Any appetite for this kind of stuff or interest in it?
Yeah. I mean, when you're having these conversations, it's hard to know what's real, right? Because everybody's interested in the thing you're talking about.
Everybody will nod.
Yeah. So in the conversations I've had, people, you talk about security and they're like, yeah, we need to do that. That's important to us. Security is an important thing. Now, where does the dollars go? Right. And so down the line, are they actually acting on that or not? That's going to be kind of where the rubber meets the road. But at least in the conversations I had, people were highly receptive to the idea of, okay, yes, we need security, or they're thinking about it. Again, it's maybe not something they're doing tomorrow, but it's something that was nobody was like, I'm not doing security ever. I'm not thinking about it for the next N years. They're like, yeah, once we get our product up and running, this is something that could be useful to us.
Could there be?
Go ahead.
I'm brainstorming here, and I'm trying to keep this focused both around AppSec plus as well as what you're doing. So I hope I go down the right path here. One of the things Mike Shima and I have been really into. I'm not sure about you, Adrian, but the idea of being as early as possible in that software development flow. In other words, having security be part of design. Would there I'm wondering is, I'm triggered off what you just said around like, we'll get to security when it's time. Is there something there where we could, or I say we, but you could sort of insert yourself or offer a service like is really when they're like just up at the whiteboard and you can like sit in the corner, have a webcam or some sort of AI thing or I don't know what, but go, oh, that right there, that's the bad idea. You need to do that this way, or that's the piece of data you need to encrypt. Or is there something like that might be able to sort of help get you in earlier, but actually help them earlier in that process?
Precogs, but for bug bounty.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Adrian, when we talked previously, you mentioned you were doing some consultative work with organizations that was kind of on demand, yeah. I think. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there's, my initial thought, and again, just completely brainstorming here, I think that, yes, there's an opportunity for it. Again, a big piece of that's going to be education, but right, like you need this thing. The thing that comes to mind immediately for me is so some sort of fractional thing where you could hire a security engineer to kind of sit in, but you don't want to hire, again, these organizations, you don't want to go get a Deloitte or a big consultancy because it's going to cost you a lot of money. And again, it's going to be a lot more expensive, and there's going to, they're going to try to draw it out as long as they can, so on and so forth. If you could get access to a security engineer for 4 hours, right, that can come in and look at what you're doing and just say, this makes sense, or like, you should be thinking about this slightly differently. I think that could be really beneficial to organizations, and you could do that for a few $100s. So I think there's that seems like an extensible use case for, and I'm not trying to rat hole here, but for one other thing that I built that I'm excited about is this idea of fractional pen testing. And I've intentionally kind of not tried to just focus on fractional pen testing, but fractional testing, right? And so it's this idea where it makes it easier to get access to cybersecurity talent in very short increments of time. And I think that could be a really good extensible use case for, I just want somebody that can, play the role of consultant for 4 hours to give me some input on this, making it a little bit more accessible. Again, it's not comprehensive. It's not going to be perfect, but anything is better than that nothing. So that I like the idea. If and when, I can capture some of this education perspective, I think that would be fantastic. That would be another thing to just layer on top, right? Is hey, this is, if I can get into these smaller organizations and say, hey, this is what you should be thinking about and how you should be thinking about it. Start here, and it's inexpensive. It's easy to do. It's non-invasive. I think that again, not going to get all 70,000, and again, not all 70,000 need it, but not going to get everybody on board, but a few is better than none.
Yeah, I like that idea, John. Like, one of the things that bothers me about the consulting world is that everything seems to have coalesced into either a pen test or a virtual CISO. And I think there's so many different services you need to help you before you're ever ready for an actual pen test, for a real pen test. And I think there's so much assistance you need before you're ready for a virtual CISO. You need a security architect. You need a security engineer. You need a cloud engineer. You need all these other things, foundational building blocks, and these skill sets before you get to like a leadership type position. Somebody look at the whole program and build a program for you and start running that program. Fractional pen testing, almost like pre-pen testing, right? There's going to be so much low-hanging fruit that it's really not worth a pen tester's skill. I used to joke that, give me 15 minutes to interview the CTO or the CIO, and I'll write up the pen test, and 80% of it will be spot on. I don't even need to touch the systems. You see the same stuff over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. I mean, going back to that, like, how early can you get into the process? Just thinking through like that list you just gave, Adrian. I mean, what happens if they choose, what I would refer to as an insecure language like PHP? It's like, by the time you come along, it's like, no, you've wasted 6 months writing a language. So, yeah.
I mean,
maybe
oftentimes that's like an AI. Maybe AI can handle that, like, first level of don't do these extremely bad things. And then you have somebody coming out.
Well, and that's one of the things I'm on the fence about, because there's a lot of bad advice out there that these large language models were trained on. So yes, they will give you that introductory level advice, but I can tell you, me, you, and John would probably disagree with about half of it.
It's fair.
At least.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of best practices out there that are the worst. The actual worst.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Grant.
Oh no, I was just agreeing. Violent agreement.
So, Yeah, talk a little bit more about, you mentioned the crowd. So, something that we probably should have covered earlier on is kind of the structure of the business, how you're set up to service any companies that come your way, because you're not doing these fractional pen tests and, maybe you're doing the bug bounty triage work, but not the actual bug bounty work. Explain how that works.
Yeah. So to quickly touch on the point that you last made, triage, again, part of making this as affordable as possible is I've abstracted out that triage element. Now, in the future, there'll be some sort of AI led guidance in terms of like how to triage things and whatnot. But, in order to make this as cheap and affordable to everybody, not bringing in that triage service level, right? So organizations will manage those submissions on their own. As far as the pen test, so it's all crowdsourced, right? I try not to lead with the term crowdsourced because it tends to, people get scared when you say that, right? And the reality is that the people that are doing the work are also the same people that would do it if you went to a PwC or something like that, right? Like they're just the same people. They're just doing it not during Monday to Friday,
cheaper,
8 to 5. But yeah, so it's all crowdsourced. So, from a pen test perspective, and I think all the players in the PTaaS market, the penetration testing as a service market, HackerOne, BugCrowd, Cobalt, I think Integrity as well. The idea is you use the crowd, right? So you have some vetted crowd members that again, their day job is at a boutique or a consultancy or something of that effect. They're a trained, vetted, qualified penetration tester. You collect skill data on them. And then you match them with whatever the client needs in that case, right? So the client comes in, they give their specifications around, I need this certain tech stack tested, or I need this specific test performed. You go match that with the best, tester for that need. And then it gets matched and they go perform the work, and that's how that works. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to get at here. Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Yeah. And one of the, not to again go in another direction, but one of the things that I think is most, I'm going to use the word fun, but it's not fun. But one of the things I'm really excited about from the penetration testing as a service and the fractional pen testing as well is that there's this untapped community of so the security community as a whole, right? Not everybody that's in the security community or that has, qualifications to be a security expert, does bug bounties, for instance, right? So when people often think of the crowd, you think of bug bounties, right? But how many people are actually, making a living or really making money off of doing bug bounties? That number is in the few thousands, probably, right? There are tens and tens and tens of thousands of people that aren't making money, doing bug bounty. And what I think is really cool again about fractional pen testing and pen testing as a service is that you can engage those individuals. So you don't necessarily have to go to the bug bounty cohort. You can go to, because a lot of the reasons why people don't do bug bounties that are security professionals is, if you're doing testing and you're, you could spend 3 hours and not get any money. You could spend 3 hours and make $10,000, right? So it's highly variable. And so if you attach static amounts, which is what you do with the pen testing as a service and what you also do with, fractional testing, right?
You get paid for your time, not results, right?
Exactly. And it unlocks this whole cohort of security professionals that, just haven't previously been given the opportunity to really engage like this.
Right. And they're kind of, these are two different jobs, right? The reason why you pay for results with a bug bounty is you're not sure what's going to get found. And the reason you put some kind of cap on what you're willing to pay out in your bug bounty is, maybe somebody finds 3,000 mediums, and you blow through your budget on day one. With stuff that's little or no value to you. And, but on the other side, it's you're not asking people to find bugs, you're asking for input, advice on stuff, like you're going to get the advice whether you like it or not. And somebody's going to get paid for that. And that, that's a tested and true model. And it's time bound, right? So it's I know I'm only going to pay $300 for an hour of this person's time. And it's going to be a best effort on their part to give some value for that amount of time, for that one $300 hour. And I that exists today, but I agree with you. I don't think it goes quite as far. Like most of the stuff that I do with I'm faculty over at IANS, which is where I do that advisory work. It usually doesn't get into like design level stuff. Like we're not screen sharing. We're not looking at stuff that they're actually building. Or we're not looking at the code. So I do think there's maybe something I'm unaware of, or, I think I'm in agreement with you that there probably is a gap there, an opportunity to go a little bit deeper than we currently go with those kinds of services today. Get more technical, more hands-on. More screen share, show me what you're doing, show me what you're thinking, do some whiteboarding and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's an exciting concept. Again, the big thing for me is the education, but I'd love to play around with that, right? Pitch that to some organizations, see, would you benefit from this? And I mean, if they benefit from it, I'll spend a weekend and build it. I
think it's generally a shift from more of a reactive mindset in security to more of a proactive one, which I think is a positive move as well.
Yep.
Well, Grant, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security, or I didn't change that either. On application. Don't change your dials. You're in the right place. This is Application Security Weekly, and thank you, Grant, so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This has been a fantastic chat. Hopefully, we talked about something interesting to everyone, but I enjoyed it. So thank you.
All right. We'll be right back in a few moments with some application security news.